In the mainstream capitalist culture, we're told that happiness comes from having nice things, having nice experiences like going to theme parks and fancy vacations. And we're told that our happiness needs to be earned and sought through our external experiences of our lives. And I've said in other videos how much of a fallacy this really is, but today I'd like to describe that with some new tools of some couple of basic graphics that I've come up with that show this traditional paradigm of happiness and unhappiness on a time graph. And so it's important for us to understand that this concept of happiness is based on the pleasure and pain cycle or relationship. Because when we have a nice new possession, yeah, we'll feel good for a bit. And then after we've had that possession for a number of years, we hardly even notice it anymore. It becomes ho-hum or every day. And so we don't really gain so much pleasure from it anymore as compared to when it was new. It's because the mind, the intellect, is fundamentally able to see differences between things, but without those differences of the contrast between the lesser possession or experience and the fancier, more convenient, more pleasurable one, without the contrast between the two, we don't even notice the beautiful things that we have. And truthfully, people with a simpler lifestyle that live on less money, they actually don't notice after a while the simplicity and more basic possessions and experiences that they have. They can actually be just as happy as someone with the fancier things over time. And the reason for that is that the fundamental quality of our lives comes from our level of consciousness and the energy that we bring to our lives, to each moment. It's the context of these experiences that's important, more so than the content of the fancy possessions or the setbacks of the stub toe or whatever uncomfortable, painful thing could happen. It's the contrast between them that we're noticing. And when we're at a different level of consciousness, we're bringing that different context or baseline energy and feeling to our day. And so on this graph, I'm showing in these columns a number of descriptions for these two levels of consciousness as described by Dr. David Hawkins in his seminal book, Power versus Force, and many of his other wonderful books. And this first level of consciousness at the bottom, he's calling pride, and this one above, he's calling willingness. And pride's not such a bad level of consciousness. It is fine to feel proud of ourselves and natural. But when you live in the level of consciousness of pride and have that feeling primarily, we tend to move through the emotion of scorn a lot more often than is perhaps helpful. And so we're seeing the life view as demanding, and we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, and seeing people as good or bad based on what they can accomplish and their behaviors. And so we can tend to have a lot of scorn for people that we see as less than. And so this level of consciousness, albeit more positive than others, is one that when we have a setback and we're feeling some pain, it's easy to blame others and find fault because our level of consciousness we're bringing of pride is one that assumes that there's someone to blame and there's always or some system to blame that it should be fixed. So we are coming back to our baseline energy and emotion as we move through our day. And whereas if we look at this level of consciousness here, which is significantly higher, that we're calling willingness, if you bring that energy to your day and you have a setback and you're challenged by some pain and suffering, then underlying that you have a willingness to accept what's happening in the moment. You have an optimism that things aren't as bad as they seem and they're bound to get better soon. And so the fundamental context of the life that's lived through willingness and optimism is very different from the baseline fundamental feeling and energy of someone at this level of consciousness. And so these levels of consciousness or energies that we tend to come back to, these are the fundamental source of the quality of our lives. And these levels of energy are what we uncover as we do more spiritual practice, such as mindfulness, meditation, and many other wonderful spiritual practices. And this is the reason that I make these videos. I feel so sad to even imagine what it's like to live just through the noise of life, pleasure and pain, which really are fundamentally linked to each other. You cannot notice one without having some experience and consciousness of the other. And it's such a sad way to live, really. It's compared to raising your consciousness to one of not just willingness, but eventually love and bliss, to bring your levels of consciousness there, you are basically immune to the noise of the stubbed toe. Okay, it's painful for a few moments, but then you don't need to suffer the incident, why it happened, and oh, if I'd only done this or that, then I wouldn't have done it. You don't need to suffer any particular painful situation any longer than a few moments of recognizing that it happened once you reach a high enough level of consciousness that you're aware of these external inputs and processing them with baseline energy that is a higher and more peaceful energy. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up down below and subscribe so you can see other of my videos when they're